Welcome to the Action Podcast, produced by Action International Ministries. Our desire is to equip and encourage missionaries as they prepare for their time serving overseas and while they're on the field. We hope that this resource will be a blessing to you. For more information about Action, please visit us online at actioninternational.org. The idea of supporting and sustaining a ministry can seem daunting. And many times people don't know how to even begin thinking through a plan to see the ministry they either started or are involved in continue long after they're no longer a part of it. Action USA's Director Brian Stewart and Action USA's Associate USA Director Dearth shed some light on how one can go about processing this aspect of missions. Brian, Derek, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about a very important topic in terms of missions and ministry worldwide. Could be anywhere in the world, not just to the nations, but even in the U.S. when we talk about the word sustainability in ministry and in missions. So thank you for joining for this very important talk. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
Sustainability, when you talk about that in the missions context, there's many schools of thought, right? When you look at sustainability, when that kind of buzzword hits your ears and your mind, your heart, there's various contexts of ministry that people are working in. There's the school of thought where we don't want to give anything. We don't want to give any money. That needs to just survive on its own, hands off. And then the other side is we're just going to support this with everything and not have anything coming from that field or from that people group. We don't want any investment from them. We're just going to do it all. And then everything in between. So this, I think, is a conversation that is not just for one podcast, and maybe it could be something more. We're not trying to cover the whole gamut of it. And we're not necessarily trying to say what is right and wrong, because the three of us here around this table, we don't know the specific context that people are working in. We don't know their situation and the people group that they work with. So we're not here to presume to know all those different variables that people in their context are dealing with day in and day out. But through this time, as we go through these points, we're just going to share our experience with sustainability. We're going to talk about what we've seen work and what we've seen maybe didn't work as well, and hopefully could be an encouragement to people that see this, that hear this. So let's just work through these things and talk about them. The first thing we have here is why sustainability matters in missions. Why does it matter? So maybe Derek, you can kind of walk through what this point would look like.
Yeah. I mean, when we think about starting ministries or helping our brothers and sisters around the world, we want to meet a real, tangible need that they have. But we don't want it to be a flash in the pan either, where it might be meeting a real need and then all of a sudden the resources run out, or we're not able to continue how we would like. Or when we were working with HIV/AIDS in Zambia, there are medical things with people too, that once you start a certain type of treatment with people or a certain type of ministry or outreach, especially with kids with HIV/AIDS, you want to make sure that you can keep on sustaining that so that they're healthy and can continue on.
Yeah, so that matters. The definition that we have for sustainability in a missions context is not necessarily something that Action would say is the right answer, but the definition, as we found, for sustainability in a missions context is the ability for ministry to thrive without outside foreign presence or funding. And I think that raises that kind of question between dependency and empowerment. Being completely dependent on outside support and what that looks like, but also the empowerment is the opposite of that, and empowering the people, working with the people. And I know, Brian, you've worked in Cuba for so many years.
Yeah, 25 years.
25 years. How many trips?
71 trips.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So as someone who can't necessarily live for good in Cuba as a missionary, how have you seen dependency and empowerment? How have you seen maybe that fleshed out in your context as you've worked with Cuba, you've worked with the national believers? What have you seen in that context?
Well, it's certainly changed over time.
Yeah.
Because when we got there 25 years ago, the church didn't even know what it needed or wanted. And you would ask, how can we... See, Action's concept is to come alongside the local church.
Yeah.
And so when we get onto a mission field and we're pioneering something like we were doing in Cuba back in the year 2000, we would ask, what do you need? What can we bring you? How can we assist you?
Yeah.
And they weren't even quite sure because the needs were so overwhelming. Well, now 25 years later, they have a real small list because they have grown and they have taken over more of the vision and more of the work. And they tell us precisely where Action can kind of fit in to what they're doing. So coming alongside the church has changed over time.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we have a specific answer that's out of Cuba that will work for every mission field. But listening and responding to the needs of the national church has been absolutely key.
Yeah.
Because if we had tried to push what we were doing 2 decades ago into the future, that wouldn't have met their need. That would have just been us repeating our own vision and not correlating our vision to what they really needed. So flexibility has been a large aspect of sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that raises a really important point, right? And what I enjoy about Action, the coming alongside, the hearing from the national believers, from the national churches, what is the real need? You know, and helping them process that, right? Because 25 years ago, the list was huge. They didn't even know how to define that, but coming alongside them and helping them shape what that would look like. And then saying, okay, what is the real need out of all this? How can we assist you and help you and thrust you forward for gospel ministry and fruitful gospel ministry in your context? So that's huge. And I think that we need to strive for that. We need to have that at the core of our organization. And I think I dare say that every organization should have that we want to do what's helping the national believers and the national churches. We don't want to presume to say, okay, this worked in the U.S. context, and so we're just going to blanket that whole approach and style and methodology everywhere. And I think it needs to be individualistic, right? Depending on what country and context and people you're working in. So that's really important. How does that produce long-term fruit in helping them with casting that vision, boiling that down? When we come up alongside local churches, local believers, how does that help produce that long-term fruit? What are some effects of helping them with that vision?
Yeah, I think that it can really help them be sustainable, obviously, in what they're hoping to do as a ministry. And I think sometimes we can artificially come alongside, like what Brian was saying, where you're not really listening to the needs of the local context. So an example that happened in Zambia when we were there was another ministry really wanted to help one of our national pastors be sustainable.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like the buzzword, and like, we need to make sure you're sustainable. So they shipped over a brick making machine, and it just shows up in his front lawn. And it's like, okay, to sustain your ministry, you're going to make bricks and be sustainable.
Yeah.
And he's like, so there's a few problems with this. One, I don't know anything about making bricks. I've never made bricks in my life. I'm only a pastor. Two, there's a brick making factory literally down the street from my house that's humongous, that knows everything about making bricks. It's actually from a different country that's come into our country to work, and they're very efficient at making bricks.
Yeah.
So I don't know how I'm going to compete with that because of those two factors. And then 6 months goes by, 9 months goes by. The other ministry gets upset with this local pastor because he wasn't being sustainable in his ministry.
Yeah.
And then they came and took the brick making machine away and cut off his funding that he was getting because he wasn't making an effort to be sustainable.
Yeah.
So if we want to really help people be sustainable in their ministries, we need to be responsive to the local context and what their needs are. In ministry, but also just economic factors and geographical factors that may be in their context.
Yeah. I'm thinking about sending goods that we've we've sent to the Philippines, right? We have a ministry in the Philippines, and we've sent goods to them, and they've received them. And some of the local shops saw our ministry leaders opening up these boxes of school supplies, and these local shops sell school supplies. And so I look at like that long-term vision. It all boils down to, we want people to come to know Christ, right? I mean, that's what we boil everything down. We want people to come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. We want people to know who Christ is. And in doing that, you're reaching people for Christ. You're reaching the communities, right? And you want to be a good witness. So when we sent those boxes and those neighboring stores saw that, they started to disconnect themselves from the work that was being done, and they were silent. Versus we started just sending finances to our team. And we said, hey, you have local shops there. Purchase your supplies from that local shop. You're building rapport and relationship with that store owner and those workers, and you're also providing support for that local economy. It changed everything. So the long-term vision for our ministry, and again, dare I say for any ministry, is that people come to know Christ. And we want to be a good witness and show that compassionate care of the gospel to the nations, right? And so for us, a little way of doing that was, instead of sending the goods, it was sending the finances that they could purchase it locally. That's not always the case. And I know Brian...
I was just going to say, we Action works in some of the most impoverished spots in the world, where even if you have a wallet full of money, you can't go out and get those things.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's challenging about sustainability is that in those circumstances, in that crushing poverty, I mean, I have been in places, it just hasn't changed over 25 years or 30 years.
Yeah.
And so in the conversation with regards to sustainability, I would think that we would not only talk about the resources, but also sustaining the vision and sustaining the relationships.
Yep.
And those three aspects are what come to mind when I think about the whole topic.
Yeah. And that makes it very clear that, again, going back to the original kind of intro and point to this podcast episode, that there's no one right or wrong. It has to be individualistic. We have to assess what the needs are. What is the economy? What do the people really need help with? We have to assess that. And it takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes patience. We have to listen well. I think there's organizations that maybe come in and don't listen as well as they should, and things happen, right? Brick makers, machines come and they get dropped off, but it's not necessarily what the need is. So being sensitive to what that culture needs at that moment and in that time helps cast that vision and thrust them forward with fruitful gospel ministry. So that's important. What about this biblical case for local leadership? We all have experience with seeing local leaders, right, being raised up, being empowered to do ministry work. Paul appointing elders in every church as he went. Jesus's model of multiplying leadership, multiplying leaders. He was multiplying himself and the work that he was doing. And the goal is not to control what's going on, but to multiply that gospel fruit, to be a multiplication of that. And entrusting, as 2 Timothy 2:2 says, entrust to faithful men who will teach others also. What have been your experiences in empowering national believers to carry on ministry work?
Well, I'll jump in and say that, again, in the Cuban context, it was very interesting because the vision that you found there 25 years ago was relatively limited.
Yeah.
So ministry ideas of taking the gospel outside of the four walls of the church were kind of non-existent.
Yeah.
And therefore, one of the things that we were able to add as we came alongside the local church was our experience. Well, what have we done in the Philippines? And what have we done in Brazil? And we would hear a lot of people say, I've always felt called to something a little bit different than being a pastor, but I wasn't sure what those opportunities could possibly be.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, we're developing local leadership
Yep.
and giving them a little bit of a larger vision so that people who have different gifting and they're supposed to be in full-time ministry but aren't really ready or even called to be the senior pastor of some, or even a Bible teacher, they can find a place.
Yeah.
Because Action has a very wide and broad concept of what full-time ministry looks like.
Sure.
And it doesn't always, come from behind the pulpit.
Yeah.
And that type of thinking doesn't exist in some places, and we can inspire that in the local church to, have new horizons.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How have you seen that, Derek, when you were in Zambia, 8 years in Zambia, working with national believers, how have you seen that idea of entrusting to faithful men? Was it difficult to find faithful people? What was the process behind that? And then what's the fruit when that does work well?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to those individual relationships. And we would run across even ourselves to a certain extent, or other folks that had really high expectations. So it's like, we're going to come in, we're going to do a 2-week training, and then we want you to be fully committed as a local pastor to go take this training
Right.
and spend hours of your time doing this. And you kind of just ask yourself, would I do the same thing if I was back in my home country? Like, if I went to a 2-week training, would I just spend all this time for free? I'm not getting paid for it. I've got tons of other family responsibilities and issues going on. I'm already a pastor who's impoverished. There's a lot of complicating factors. So I think just realizing that each context is different, and especially for the folks that we help and minister with and to in very impoverished areas, they have a lot on their plates that we're not really able to understand all that's going on. So I do think that there can be a Western mindset of, you need to do all these things, and then if that doesn't happen right away, it's like, oh, you're not really sold out, or you're not really invested the way that you should be, but not even understanding that, both of their parents are sick, their children are struggling in these ways. They're struggling to even get food that day. So many places outside of the Western world, as you guys know, are so family interconnected.
That's right.
And not understanding the push and pull that constantly is.
Right.
So I think really understanding as best you can the culture, and that pastor or ministry leader is ministering in, and and then it's really, one of the things I love about Action is that we do try to partner with the local church and with national partners. So we relied heavily on our Zambian friends to speak into situations and work alongside them. And they were really helpful at navigating those cultural situations that we didn't quite understand.
Yeah, that's good. There are barriers, though, right, to local leadership development. There's a lack of intentional discipleship. There's a fear of losing control. I think that some organizations and some people that are overseeing a ministry might feel like, well, I don't want to entrust this to this faithful guy or faithful woman, because I'm going to lose control, right? And then what am I going to say to my supporters? And we struggled with that when we came back from the field in 2020. And we turned over our ministry to national leadership and to a national church. I thought, oh no, well now what am I going to do? And I felt like my identity was bound up in that ministry and in the Philippines and in that culture. And I thought, man, I was struggling, because now what am I going to write in my monthly newsletters?
That's very honest,
right? I mean, what am I going to say to my supporters that are giving of so much finances each month to our ministry and to our work, now that we're not there? So I felt like I didn't know how to proceed. I didn't know how to move forward. And really it came down to that fear. I was afraid of not necessarily losing control, because I was excited that the ministry was going to be continuing on with the local leaders in the local church. But I had that fear of, oh no, my supporters are going to stop supporting us now that we're not on the field. But the joy in that was the Lord was transitioning us to a different ministry, to a different thing that God wanted to move us to. And I had to realize that my identity wasn't in that ministry. My identity is in Christ. And no matter where I was, no matter what I was doing, that I'm called to Him. And I'm called to love, obey, and serve him wherever I am at. And God opened up opportunities for us to serve in different ways. But that fear of losing control could sometimes be a hindrance to really fully empowering the national believers for the ministry that they might be called to do. And we need to let that go. Would you say that that's fair? You've maybe seen that or experienced that there's still that desire to kind of hold control.
Yeah. It's not an irrational fear because
Yeah.
I think probably as we've all experienced, as you begin to entrust people with vision and resources and some of your international friendships, I think all three of those components need to be multi-generational for it to really be sustainable.
Yeah.
So you're introducing your friends to them, your supporters to them, your vision, your resources. Sometimes things go very wrong.
Right.
But thankfully we have the experience, and this is one of the things we're trying to communicate on the podcast. Through our experience, we can say, no, they mostly go right.
Yeah.
And because God is superintending all of those things and he wants it to be sustainable,
Sure.
then he will make it work out.
Yeah.
But you will have some crashes and some pitfalls along the way.
Yeah.
Our founder, Doug Nichols, he was the most sharing person that I knew, and that set me out on a good course.
Yeah.
And as soon as a new field would open up, like Cuba, he would get on the phone with his personal supporters.
Wow.
And, hey, can you help in Cuba? We've
My
got some
goodness.
great things going on in Cuba.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him, well, won't that eventually dilute and decrease the support that you and your wife have and all the other ministries have? He says, no, it will multiply.
Wow.
As people's interests multiply, they will just expand their heart and expand their giving.
Wow.
If you just hear that and you've never experienced it, you can be a little bit afraid to implement that and go in that direction. Well, what if my national colleague ends up taking away all the support from this person that I introduced them to? That's a challenge, and I suppose that it does happen.
Yeah.
But developing those relationships and allowing them to proceed is crucial for sustainability, because if you really want to move on, then you need to have a well-planted vision and you need to have good relationships, and there does need to be some continuity of resource flow even when you're gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a barrier for empowering believers is lack of knowledge and understanding of the culture, right? And that comes with time.
Yeah.
And I'm
Right,
thankful, right, that Action, we want our workers to do language learning. We want our workers to really invest in learning culture, understanding what people are going through. I mean, you're talking about Africa and what are they really going through? Brian, you're talking about Cuba and what they were struggling with their economy and the government, and very hard, real things, difficult challenges. And if we're not understanding where they're coming from, then that's going to be a barrier, because it's going to change our leadership structure, or it's going to change how we lead them well. It's going to change our decision-making process, right? We're going to allow them to make decisions that maybe at first we're thinking, oh, this wouldn't work where we're at. Well, of course, it wouldn't work where you're at, but it works for them because that's not the U.S. And we're working in a different place.
Yeah.
So cultural differences in leadership style and decision-making could be a barrier, right, in how we work with people.
And I think along with that is the vision that you're helping develop with that local church, or if there isn't a local church in that context, the vision that you're trying to develop with, believers that are there, or maybe there's no believers and you're just starting to work. Is that really like scratching an itch that's there? And I think sometimes a barrier to local leadership development is either the vision wasn't cast super well, or it's really not scratching an itch that's there. So it's hard for people to really understand, or it's maybe too Western in how it's set up,
Right.
where it's like people just aren't getting, it just doesn't fit super well in that culture.
Sure.
So you have to kind of be thinking through that too. Like, what's the best way? And if something isn't really taking off, is it because maybe there's just hardness to the gospel? Maybe it's just a very challenging place. Like, those things could be true, but it could be too that your initial vision and setup really isn't tailored enough to that local culture just to run.
Yeah.
So I think it's easy to kind of always look at well, if only our national partners would do this a little bit differently or do this a little bit
Right.
better or
Right.
whatever it is, instead of kind of looking back at yourself and being like, okay, maybe I'm not understanding something here and I need help.
Yeah. And how have you done that in Cuba?
I think there's kind of a dichotomy where you need to show leadership when you're going in there. That's
Yep.
what you're being sent to do, and to offer suggestions
Sure.
and new opportunities. But you also need to be ready to listen very quickly.
Yeah.
And one of the things an example that comes to mind is in Cuba. We thought that they could evangelize and disciple younger people through camps, evangelistic camps.
Yep.
And they liked that idea. And then we said, so every Christian needs to come with an unsaved friend. And they said, well, how in the world will that work out? We would never do that. Why would you invite the unsaved people to the Christian camp?
Right.
So that was a kind of a leadership in casting that vision. They weren't quite sure, but you were coming in and you're providing the resources and the training, and you're getting the team together. And so that was a brand new thing, and we helped the local church. But then after they do that 2 or 3 or 4 times, then they come to you with all of the different changes.
Yep.
You know, you provide the rough draft, they give you the edits.
Yep.
And you need to be able to flex a little bit
Yeah.
and go from being the leader,
Yep.
the originator, to, okay, let's do it your way.
Yep.
Okay, maybe you should be in charge of the next camp, and you should train the team, and I'll just be in the background if you need any help. So that happens pretty quickly.
Yep.
And flexing, it can be a little bit challenging to your ego.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have to do both. You have
Yep.
to lead, but you also have to listen.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, to Brian's point, it may be too that the church doesn't really want to do something, but it is the right thing to do. It's the biblical thing to do, and that's why that area of the world needs workers, why it needs missionaries, is because you're there to be salt and light, even with the local church, to say, hey, have you thought about this vision and mission to people that are suffering with HIV/AIDS? And it's like, we don't really want to engage in that too much. But then from a biblical point of view, you show them, no, the Bible is very clear that we should be reaching out to people that are struggling with HIV/AIDS. So it's that balance between,
That's right.
like, gently pushing on certain things, but then also realizing I might not have all of the understanding here, and I need to kind of change my approach.
Right. Yeah. So barriers they exist, and they're real things. And I think it comes down to prayer, much prayer. We need a lot of prayer as we enter into these relationships to discern when to push and when to hold back.
Yeah.
To really pray that God would lead that God would do that. What about building indigenous capacity from the start? And of course, you were saying, Brian, in Cuba, things happen pretty quickly, right? That you do these camps, and all of a sudden there's all these other variables, things that happen. They're coming to you now with this whole list of edits, right?
Yeah.
But pretty quickly, there is that indigenous capacity for leadership. You can start really identifying like who's really stepping forward as leaders, who you really want to choose. There's that parachute ministry style, right? Versus coming as a learner and a partner. There's that parachute mentality where I'm just going to Dumbo drop all this stuff, right? And do that. That's an old movie reference.
I like that one.
Yeah. So you just Dumbo drop all these things that aren't necessarily maybe what the people need, what the church needs. And not saying just physical things, but, the practical, spiritual aspect of things or leadership things might not be what that church needs or those people need. And here's this thought. Okay, I want to talk about this. Having people as co-laborers and not just as assistants or subservient people, but we are co-laborers with Christ, right? We are co-heirs with Christ, but we co-labor in gospel ministry, right? And so what is that idea of training nationals as co-laborers? We're working together in this ministry, and not that I'm just going to tell you what to do. What's the danger in that?
Well, I don't know if you experienced this in Africa, but one of the pitfalls we had in Cuba, for example, was that I think that if you're a Westerner and you go overseas, you have kind of a democratic idea about, well, if you're gifted, maybe you should lead this. And you're always on the lookout for someone that you can give more responsibility to. But in some cultures, if you are giving authority in an event to somebody who's not a pastor, that actually creates friction in the local church. And so you're not helping in that way. And that's a little bit challenging to navigate. So I think that when, action people are always looking to see who can help them. And who that they can actually invest into and raise up into leadership. But that can hit kind of a ceiling depending on the culture. Because everything's supposed to flow through the pastor, including leadership decisions and who gets to be at the microphone.
Yeah, it's very similar in Zambia. So you definitely have to be careful about that. But like we team taught for our HIV AIDS ministry, and each of us kind of came at it from a different angle. So John was coming at it more from a Pentecostal pastor angle. Etta was from a Reformed Baptist church. We were coming at it from the American side of things. And then as we taught through different topics about how does the local church engage in HIV AIDS ministry, we just divided those topics up. And John and Etta would say, this would really be great coming from John as a pastor or Etta as a counselor. There's some denominational things that we need to think through with this group of people. Or as an American, you can actually really speak into this and they'll receive it better than if I said it. And then there's also some things too of just like tribalism and ethnicity around the world that we don't always understand as Westerners, where there were different groups that we taught, and John and Etta would say, this really needs to come from you because I'm of this tribe and they're not going to accept this from me, but they'll accept it from you and I can chime in, but we need to do this together.
Yeah, and I think that the way that in Cuba we avoided having too much conflict with the authority structure of the local church is when you're really coming alongside with a brand new ministry idea. Have you ever thought of reaching out to single moms? Oh, no, we don't have anything like that. And then it's easier to start that program and to raise up leadership because there isn't an established hierarchy because that's brand new.
Right. So now kind of moving into possibly a more sensitive thing in this is the finance aspect. That's really difficult. That's really, really challenging. But the financial model of supporting ministry and work that we're involved in over many different countries, but that sustainability idea of helping people but not creating dependency, that's a really challenging thing to navigate. And I've known workers in the Philippines that have built years relationships with pastors and have helped fund a building project. And that money was just taken, and then that pastor was never seen from or heard from again. And you would think, man, that missionary has worked with that pastor for years and built a relationship, and now they're just gone. So at the end of the day, I think you try to do what you can, right? But the Lord is in control. God is in control. He's sovereign. You would think that that person wouldn't do that, right? After years of having that relationship with the missionary. But it happened. A lot of money. It's very enticing. But how have you seen financial models work and maybe not work in the context that you've been involved in ministry overseas?
Well, it kind of goes back to my previous comment that you have to have some faith that over time it's all going to work out in your favor and for the benefit of the local church, but there will be some pitfalls. Initially, it's more of a minefield as you're getting to know people and you're working together. And if you can stay with it, and this is one of the things, you as a missionary do need to go in there with a mindset is I'm going to invest enough time for this to develop. There will come a time where, because when you first start out, people are kind of waiting for you to take the lead, and they're not necessarily doing a lot until you make the resources available. Then as you're working with them and you're sharing the vision, they catch the vision. And the next thing you know, they're saying, instead of just waiting around, they're saying, well, we're going to go do such and such. Do you think you could pay for gasoline? And they're not they're not expecting a shipment from outside the USA because they've got a clothing drive from their local church.
Yep.
And they're doing all the work, but they just need a little bit of help.
Yep.
Because they're not going to be able to raise cash.
Yep.
To go to fill the tank and go out to the mountains and deliver those clothes. And it takes a while to get to that tipping point.
Yep.
So you do have to stay the course.
Yeah.
But it will happen. And it is such an exciting thing when it happens.
Yeah.
You have to believe it by faith. But when all of a sudden you're trying to catch up to your colleagues, your national workers' vision.
Yeah.
And they're saying, we're doing all this stuff. We just need a little bit of help to get it over the finish line. That's a great day.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
How have you seen that work?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with scale and like what your preconceived notions are.
Yep.
So when we went into churches in Zambia, we tried to make it pretty low key.
Yep.
Usually we would park at a local police post and walk in.
Yep.
We wouldn't use a PowerPoint projector. We would just talk around in a circle. We would provide copies of the curriculum. But then if they wanted to produce copies, there's copy machines all over Zambia. People are constantly needing to make copies of government documents and different things like that. So it wasn't terribly expensive for them to make copies.
Yep.
So there was, giving them agency to do that, to make those copies, but really trying to do a model where to do HIV/AIDS ministry, you don't need a Land Cruiser.
That's right.
You don't need a PowerPoint projector. You don't need a laptop. You don't need all these things. Like it can look like this. It can look very organic and so we tried to keep it really low cost. But then like what Brian was saying, when there were these bigger conferences or bigger things like that, a lot of the churches would come together and say, we can do these things, but no one's going to have the funds to do a bus.
Right.
So if you could provide bus fare for all of us to get to this location, that would be super helpful.
Yeah.
Or we'd love to do this ongoing feeding program. We're providing the venue. We're providing the laborers. We're providing these things. We'll do all of that, but we just need this much money for this much food.
Yep.
And then we partnered with a local church in the States to make that happen. And you see that as a biblical model. I mean, all over the scriptures. And I do think in the West, we need to be careful of, the Bible does call us to give to those that are in need. And we see Paul taking a collection from other churches to help out with famine relief in a different area of the world.
Right.
There is a model for that. And I think sometimes we get so worried about creating dependency or creating this kind of like patron-client relationship and things like that, that we forget the biblical model. And, I do wonder, like when we get to heaven someday, how is God going to approach us in that? Is that going to be like, I was so stingy, Lord, with all of the resources, and I made sure that I didn't,
create dependency.
Yeah, create dependency. Or is it like, what was my heart attitude?
Yeah.
And sometimes we are going to give money to folks and things won't work out super well. And there'll be pitfalls or stops and starts. But what's our heart posture towards those in need?
Yeah. Yeah, you can control what you do, right? And in terms of like giving finances, right? And I think that we are all held accountable for what we do and don't do, for what we say and don't say. My wife loves that saying. She uses that often. But it's true. I mean, we can't, like the pastor that ran with that money, that missionary, he with his best intention, he thought that he had built that relationship well, and to entrust those finances and those funds to that pastor, he thought he was doing the right thing. He's not held accountable for what that pastor does or doesn't do. I think sometimes we overanalyze this. Oh, I don't want to create dependency, and it's like, no, there's this person that really needs a tank of gas, and it's practical, and it's something that they need, and they've come to me, and with humility and boldness, asked me for help. And so I want to do that. I want to reach out in that way. So don't overthink it. I think sometimes early on in ministry, we overthink things. We try to overanalyze things, but we need to let the Spirit lead. We need to let the Lord lead in those moments. Yeah, that's important.
I previously referenced Doug Nichols, our founder, but there's also Nelson Reed, our international director, former international director, one of your mentors.
Yeah.
He used to talk about just as long as we see progress, you can't get from 100% you're providing 100% of the resources to zero.
Yep.
Maybe even in your first, second, third term, or maybe even in your lifetime. But you want to see progress.
Yeah.
And my particular sentiment with regards to my heart's attitude, as you were mentioning, is I don't want it to get to zero.
Yeah.
Because I like the international connection.
Yep.
I definitely want to get it to the point where they're taking the lead and they're telling us what would be great to partner
That's right.
with. But if you get it to zero, then that kind of means that they're on their own and the connection is broken.
Right.
And you've spent all of this time building connection, not only your own, but bringing your friends down and introducing them, and the new friendships form, new opportunities form, and I'd like to see those continue.
Yeah.
So you want to see it decreasing because that's very healthy. Obviously, that's in the right direction, but I don't want to see it go to zero, frankly.
Right. So,
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, because I do think some of the dependency and sustainability stuff, it's like, well, we need to work ourselves out of a job.
Yep.
But sometimes it can be so much where it's like, then our national partners are like, oh, like,
left me hanging.
You're done. Like, I thought we were going to be friends, and I thought we were going to, not so I could get stuff out of you, but I just like this relationship and this connection and this encouragement. So I think that is something that's kind of missed.
Yeah.
And we are called to be a body of believers around the world that are connected.
Yeah.
And that does mean financial connections, and that
Right.
means relational connections and resource connections. And yeah, I don't feel like you see the biblical model necessarily of like, and now the connection stops.
Right.
Like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and remember that your national colleagues, your on the field colleagues, are providing so much. Maybe it's not denominated in currency in dollars,
Right.
Yeah.
but they're providing so much of their time and
That's right.
assistance.
Yeah.
And so if you really value their contribution,
Yeah.
it might be equal or even more heavily weighted to what they're giving. So we can't give the dollar too much prominence in our calculation.
Right.
Yeah, that is so true, because you don't know the relational capital that your national partner is putting on the line to have this ministry start or come, or
That's right.
we would find that out all the time later on. We would speak in a church, and when you're talking about a sensitive situation like HIV/AIDS and church and family relationships, you'd find out weeks later, like, oh, this really caused a conflict with this pastor's wife or this pastor's brother or this local church congregant, because those are some really hard issues to talk through, or expose some sin that has kind of blown up now in the church. So you don't understand, like, they might not be giving financially, but they're giving a lot relationally capital to make that ministry happen.
Yeah, another example would be, when you take a short-term team into Honduras, like your local church did, or somebody that comes down to Cuba, and you are providing the resources to get a van so that you and the local team can be moving from place to place. Well, that's great that you put in the $900 or $1,000, but what about the team leader who is also the driver, and there's a gas shortage, and he literally spends all the night sleeping in his van so that he can be there when the gas station opens at 4 a.m. because they're going to run out of gas in 2 hours. And so he's working off of no sleep in order to serve the team.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how you put a dollar sign to that contribution.
Right.
My sense is that's as valuable as your $900.
That's right. Yeah. That's important. So that tipping point that you were talking about, when you see those national believers now not feeling that dependency 100% from you, but there's that 50%, right? Now there's this relationship where it's going back and forth. I want to talk about the role of the sending church, or in this case, Action as an organization. What is our role in working with people beyond that? Okay, we've started the ministry. We've helped them establish things. We've helped them cast the vision. We've helped them establish that work in the community. And maybe there's been a lot of financial capital that we've invested into it. But now we've reached that tipping point where we can start to see that change in the winds, where people are like, the national believers and the churches are saying, well, I want to take some ownership of this now. What is our role now in coming up alongside them? How do we navigate that relationship? Like you were saying, we don't want to just drop it completely and cut off communication and contact with them. What now is our role? How can we help?
It's really difficult.
It is.
It is really difficult when that tipping point happens and the vision is no longer yours. And the leadership degree program that you started doesn't depend on outside teachers, because now the Cubans, for example,
Yep.
have all the faculty they need.
Yeah.
And you do have a tendency to begin to distance yourself. But then that really hurts their feelings. And They
Right.
feel like we're partners in this.
Yep.
And it's changed a little bit, but why aren't you coming like you used to?
Right.
And I find that very challenging, so I'm not sure I can speak to it because I'm still working through that on my own.
Yeah.
Because I haven't really done all that well. Because it is easy to go on to the next thing
Yeah.
once your friends take over the leadership.
Sure.
It's very easy to go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And then they feel a little bit abandoned.
Yeah, and thankfully now, I mean, we live in an age where you can send a WhatsApp message or a Signal message,
Yeah.
where you can be in contact and kind of do encouragement from afar. But I think to remember too that there's just seasons of life and seasons of ministry, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, there are times that ministry is so sweet and the partnership is so sweet, and then for whatever reason, things change. It becomes more sustainable. It becomes more nationally led. The issue of HIV/AIDS is not as big of an issue in Southern Africa as what it was 25 years ago. So it's kind of always easy to look back with nostalgia on certain seasons of ministry and go, oh, I just wish it could be like that. But then you realize, like, no, that was a season, a time, and a place that the Lord brought these people together for this time.
Yeah.
And now that's changed and it looks a little different.
Right.
And that's okay.
And I know for you and I, Derek, you know, we lived on the field for years. We built those relationships. Now we're back in the U.S., right? The Lord has changed our ministry, right? And we're doing different things. But I think what's similar in all of our relationships with the people that we have worked with overseas is we become that advocate now. We become, it's a different role. We become that encourager, that advocate. When we turned over our ministry in the Philippines to a national believer, Teacher Day, she felt like, I'm going to be abandoned. You're going to leave all this work to me, and I'm not qualified for it. So it began with encouraging her and empowering her that, no, you've been doing this for 2 or 3 years with us, but you're just going to be taking that title, but you've been doing that role. You've been doing it. But then it turned into that mentoring relationship where she will send a WhatsApp message to Alay. She'll say, Alay, I need prayer. This is what I'm going through. I'm struggling. Can you pray for me? And Alay will give her a voice message and encourage her. So the relationship became more of that mentoring, encouraging, being an advocate. I know you go to Zambia, as often as you can, but the amount of joy that comes when you step off the plane and you see those workers again. When we went to the Philippines a couple months ago, the encouragement that was for our workers over there for the ministry, it just gave them that boost, knowing that they're not alone. They're not doing it alone. And Brian, you send still so many teams and pastors out to Cuba. You're keeping that connection, letting them know that they're not just out on a wire on their own, right? And you've become that empowering encourager and advocate for the people doing that work.
Yeah, that was one of the components. I'm talking about vision, sustainability, and financial sustainability, but relational sustainability. Some of that for me has been, a lot of that has been bringing people into the ministry and inviting them down to participate.
Yeah.
And then those friendships just take off.
Yeah.
And so even in the example I just gave about the leadership degree program, though I'm rarely on site, somebody that I have brought down is almost always there because I've initiated something that is continuing without me having to be involved. And that's exciting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this whole conversation, right, about sustainability, it takes much prayer. It takes a lot of time, investment, when able, living in that culture and context for years at a time. But I want to encourage the people that are watching and listening, if they feel like they haven't arrived yet, or if they're not at these points of sustainability, I don't want them to feel discouraged, and it's a long process. It's a marathon that we're in. Missions is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I think that we've given some lessons, we've given some things that we've learned and grown in, that we're still learning and growing in. And we need to be humbled enough to admit that. And we are. We have not arrived at anything. Right. And we've made a lot of mistakes, and we're going to continue to make mistakes. But God is in control. He's sovereign. And I just hope that people listening and watching will be encouraged by, there is success that happens. There is growth that happens. And ultimately, God is the one who's going to be in control over all these things.
Yeah, and the journey is worth it. Even with some of these
yes.
pitfalls that we've described, the journey is worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so exciting and fulfilling and edifying to work as a team.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you wonder in the moment, is this, all these months that we're spending with this local church, is it doing anything? And then because of COVID, I hadn't been back to Zambia in 5 years. When we came back, COVID was kind of in the middle, small kids, and then I went back again. And my last day there, I was in a market with John, one of our national workers, and someone just randomly ran up and said, "Derek, Pastor John," and said, "We were in your Cross Project program 7-8 years ago." It was like a long 10 years ago, a long time ago, and that was really helpful. And I've used that material in my church and in my community, and that just felt like, wow, that was just a nice little testimony from the Lord right before I was leaving at the end of that trip. Because you kind of wonder, was this really worth it? And did it make an impact? And was it helpful? And that was just like an answer from the Lord, like, yeah, this was helpful. This was, and the journey is worth it. And it's messy. Relationships are messy. Working cross-culturally is messy. I think you take different concepts about sustainability. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is sometimes we can get so invested in something that there are red flags or there are things that are happening and we're like, I think we should pull back. But we've invested so much that there's this feeling of we just got to keep on going and hopefully this will work itself out.
Right.
But sometimes you do really need to make that hard call and just say, we need to pull back. This relationship, it's not working. There's some kind of major red flags here. But yeah, it's going to be messy. You're not always going to figure it out. And good, helpful principles to think through with sustainability. But that, like you said earlier, that's not the end goal. The end goal is that people would know the Lord Jesus, and that's what we're striving towards. So we're not striving towards making sure we do everything perfectly or in the most efficient or sustainable way that we can. That's just going to be impossible to do.
Yeah, we want to see people come to know the Lord. We want to see the kingdom grow. We want to see people walk faithfully with Him, and be with us one day in heaven. That's the goal. That's what we're working towards. And along the way, we're trusting the Lord to work out those steps for us that He's ordained and set forth for us. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk about sustainability. It's a tough topic. It's a difficult topic, but it's good to be able to kind of flesh these things out a little bit and hopefully be an encouragement to those that are serving overseas. So,
thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, dear.
Yeah, thank you.